Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. In a world that often seems chaotic and overwhelming, the internal journey of self-discovery, healing, and finding connection is more critical than ever. May this journey include expressing our experiences through poetry, prose, and other forms of writing. My guest this week on Vox Novus, poet, educator, and author Meredith Heller, used poetry to heal her own life and has been guiding others towards self-expression ever since. Meredith Heller is the author of Write a Poem, Save Your Life, and several poetry collections. A poet, singer, songwriter, avid nature lover, and educator with degrees in writing and education, she leads writing workshops online and in person at schools, juvenile detention centers, women's prisons, and wellness retreats. Her website is meredithheller.com, and she joins me this week to share her path and latest book, Writing by Heart, a poetry path to healing and self-discovery. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Meredith Heller. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Meredith, please share with us your early path and how writing and poetry birthed for you as forms of expression.
Sure. I had a very unconventional growing up. I left home when I was about 12, 13 years old, being disenchanted with school that didn't really tap me in ways I wanted to learn and grow, disenchanted with society that didn't dig deep enough for meaning and connection and relationship with the earth, and disenchantment with a very dysfunctional family. And so I went to the place I trusted the most, which is nature. And I lived out in old abandoned barns and old abandoned houses and domes that I built in the woods along the Potomac River, about 20 minutes outside of Washington, D.C., where I was growing up. And it was a very hard time for me. I was very alone. I suffered with horrible depression. There was no security, nothing, and no one to hold on to. And all of my friends were dying of suicide and overdose. And I probably wasn't that far behind them. And poetry and songwriting found me. I would get the first line of poetry or the first line of song lyric with a melody into my left ear like a lifeline and a work permit that really was an invitation saying, stay here, stick with it, write your way to clarity, to understanding, and to even perhaps making beauty out of what feels overwhelming, feelings of loss and hurt and loneliness. So that's how poetry found me. I went on from there to go back to school and get degrees. And what I realized was that I wanted to get to the kids who had been like I was. And I wanted to say, here's a way we can write ourselves home. We can write ourselves free. And so then I was a poet in the schools for 30 years, and now I'm teaching adult women.
And your bio says your calling led you to degrees in both writing and education. As a California poet in schools, you offer workshops in public and private schools, in women's prisons, the Institute for Poetic Medicine, creativity summits, wellness retreats, and online. Please share a little about each of these settings and how these workshops promote healing and empowerment.
Great question. Thank you. So, working in as a poet in the schools for 30 years, first in Boulder, Colorado, and then in Marin County, California, also teaching in juvenile hall. So, I had this great range of working with at-risk kids, highly gifted, creative kids, and every kind of kid who goes to a regular public school as well. And I would say that the beautiful moments are seeing when kids realize their own creativity and that they have something original to share and that they find a vehicle through poetry where they can express their deepest concerns and what they most care about. And to watch them make poetry their own, to watch them find their voice and have an avenue of expression was so fulfilling for me. And so that was the beauty of working in the public schools. Working in private schools with kids is, I think they're so structured and disciplined that to allow them some freedom and creative expression was like bringing them to an oasis. Working in juvenile hall, where the kids were in lockdown, many of whom had been in gangs, had horrible losses and trauma in their lives. They would often say, "Hey, Meredith, why do we need to write poems? We're stuck here in lockdown." And I would say, your imagination is one of the very few places in your life where you're the only one who gets to make up the rules. So let's make the most of it. So that was incredibly rewarding, and the poems that came out of each of those arenas I find thrilling. Working in the women's prison, I would say, is one of my very favorite things I've ever done. I didn't know what it would be like, and I was a little nervous when I first went in, and I found the incarcerated women to be so genuine and so honest and so willing to look at their lives and own what they had done and be committed to making changes, really because they wanted to get back to their families and their loved ones. And it was a very, very rich experience. And I remember, especially after one series, and all the women in the prison all get a copy of my book as part of being in the poetry workshop. And so at the end of one series, they said, "Oh, Meredith, we're going to really miss you. We love being in workshop with you." And then they hugged my book to their chest and said, "But we have your book now, and we're going to keep writing." And that was it for me. I just started crying. So that's amazing. I love doing that work with that population. And now I am working since COVID. I created these online workshops for women to create community when we were so isolated in quarantine. And these workshops have blossomed and grown so that I have women all over the country and a few around the world. And we meet once a week for a 5-week series. And this goes on through the whole year. Each one has a slightly different focus. And we learn and grow together. We laugh and cry together. We see that there is a commonality between us as human beings, as women. We have similar hopes and dreams, and desires and fears and longings. So we see that we're not alone. And paradoxically, we see that our story is unique and that it matters. Our voice being woven in to the whole living community of life matters. And I see these women walk out of workshop literally and metaphorically standing taller, walking their talk, walking their truth, saying yes when they mean yes, no when they mean no, and having really been enriched and fortified and more confident in themselves. They found their voice, and it is such an honor to work with them.
Before we discuss your new book, Writing by Heart, A Poetry Path to Healing and Self-Discovery, let's discuss Write a Poem, Save Your Life. What inspired this book, and what did you offer your readers?
Thank you. So this book really came out of the work that I had been doing, working with, specializing with teens in the schools and in private workshops. I specialized with teen girls for empowerment and self-expression. And I just felt at one point that the work that they had been producing, the poems and the invitations were so rich that I really felt like I wanted to share it with a greater audience. I wanted to share it with the world and open this avenue of self discovery and self expression to as many people as possible. So I sat down and wrote the first draft of the book very quickly in about 2 weeks, and then spent the next 2 years making it sing and shine. And so it is chock full of what I call writing invitations, writing experiences. And you can open to any page in the book and find a creative theme that brings up an inquiry into your own life and your own journey, and then a writing invitation, and then example poems to so that you can see what other people, other teens did. This book, though it is full of teen examples, it could be for any age of person, and new or seasoned writers will find so many great invitations, both to expand creativity and imagination, as well as to take a deep look at our own lives with self-reflection and hopefully digging up treasures.
What about that save your life part? You had talked about being with other teens when you were growing up who were suicidal. And we seem to have, unfortunately and terribly, an outbreak of that in our current society today. A lot of people are either contemplating suicide or have taken their own lives. What is there about saving your life with a reflection of poetry?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beginning of this book, in the introduction, I tell the story of how poetry writing saved my own life. Being that teen, growing up on my own, going through a lot of trauma, feeling very alone, untethered really from life, from society, from family, from any kind of security. So I tell the story about how poetry writing saved my life and how I had this epiphany that this was so special and so powerful in my life that I realized this is my path, to share poetry writing as a way to befriend ourselves and turn toward the challenges and the obstacles and the depression and the hopelessness, as well as the beauty and the joy, but to turn toward what is hard with the companionship and the mirror of our writing, this deep, personal, self reflective, self expressive writing that we do in my workshops and that you can do with the books. And I really do believe that it can save your life. I think that we are trained to move away from what hurts and what's painful. And if we can turn toward it and give it our attention, believing that it is working in our favor for our growth, then we befriend not only what feels like the obstacle, but we befriend ourselves. And this does save our life.
It sounds a lot like engendering self compassion.
Very much so. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And making room for all of it. As I was saying, that all of the feelings and all of the challenges and what feels like obstacles are welcome here in myself and here in our writing. So that means having a conversation with depression, having a conversation with hopelessness. And if we dig deep enough with these feelings, there's usually a message that those feelings are trying to get through to us. Hey, I'm not happy. Can we make some changes here? Hey, this thing doesn't feel right for me. Can we do something different? And I feel like when we begin to make room for all of it, not just the good, but all of it, we have a much richer human experience. We're more resilient, and our capacity, both for the depth of sorrow and the heights of joy, grows.
Beautiful. Do you have one favorite poem from your students that you share in that book?
I would love to share one with you. Thank you, Victor.
You're welcome.
This is called Hummingbird by Elisa, who's 17. Hummingbird. They called me one when I was a little girl, I who was always flittering around, light as a feather, determined as a bee, my eyes iridescent, my cheeks flushed, never could sit still, always dancing off to the next sip of sweetness. So when I went off to art school and all my friends were decorating their skin with ink, I wanted one on my left shoulder so I could look back and remember. I didn't know it would hurt. The tiny wings, the red throat, the sound and breeze as they hovered for one infinitesimal moment with pointed beak, supping up the midday mead, the circles they made in the air, chasing each other, drunk on a sunny day above a pear tree. I wanted that kind of love.
That young woman may have been 17 years old, but I believe she was an old soul.
I do too. I get chills reading that.
That is magnificent.
I especially love that last line. I wanted that kind of love,
Yeah.
that she could sense that hummingbird and that experience she had when she was a child, when she was like a hummingbird, was her sense of being in that place, that experience of love. And that was how she wanted to mark and stamp herself, with the experience of love.
Beautiful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing that.
Yes.
What inspired your latest book, Writing by Heart, A Poetry Path to Healing and Self-Discovery?
Well, as I was saying, in October of 2020, when we were all in quarantine, I had been teaching, specializing in teaching private poetry workshops for teen girls for empowerment and self-expression. And one of the mothers of one of those teen girls asked if I would do a poetry class for her and some of her women friends. And I said, gosh, I don't know if I know enough to teach adult women. And she said, oh, Meredith, I've been sitting outside my daughter's door for years during your workshops doing all the writing, and I definitely think you know enough. To which I thought, so much for confidentiality, but okay. So we started our first class. I had 8 women, mostly from the Bay Area in California, and we had a great time. And when that series finished, they asked for another one, and this time they came back with their friends from all over the country. And so we went from 1 cohort to 2 to 3, and we keep growing. We currently have 5 cohorts with women from all over the world. And I sat down, I'd been living in the California desert. I sat down one day and looked at all the material and thought, I want to share this with the world. So very much like the first book, I sat down, I had 2 weeks off from teaching. I sat down and wrote the first draft of the book in 2 weeks and spent the next year making it sing. And so this book, like the first one, is chock full of writing invitations, probably a little more inviting to probe more deeply since I'm now working with adults. There's some pieces and some chapters that are a little more edgy than in the first book. And then the poems are just mind-blowing, heart-opening. I call the poets in this book and the poets who come to my workshops the women warrior poets. They are brave and beautiful and vulnerable and brilliant. And they show up each week in workshop and dig deep and dig up the treasures in their lives, or make what they thought was challenging or debilitating into the treasures. And this book is full of their poems, their treasures.
My guest is Meredith Heller. Her book, Writing by Heart, A Poetry Path to Healing and Self-Discovery. Meredith, please share with our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your amazing work.
meredithheller.com. That has all the information about books and workshops, and both books are available online everywhere books are sold, or from your favorite small bookstore, independent bookstore. You can order it. These books are everywhere for you.
And we'll be back with more of Meredith after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes. Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Meredith Heller. Her book, Writing by Heart, A Poetry Path to Healing and Self-Discovery. You talk about writing by heart in the title of your book. What does writing by heart mean to you?
I have always loved this concept of doing something by heart. When we do something by heart, we know it through and through. We know it in our bones and in our blood, and we have put time in with it. to practice it, to make it our own. And it becomes a part of us to where we can trust it to be there and trust ourselves to know how to access it. And so that is my hope for people coming into this writing practice, is that we become fluent in the cultivation of this connection with ourselves and our writing in a way that feeds us and nourishes us and gives us a map to clarity, to healthy choices, to being able to see ourselves more clearly, and even a map to the unknown, to being willing to not know what we're going to write or how it's going to turn out until we really get in there with our paper and pen and become part of the creative process. So I'd say if I really had to boil it down, I would boil it down to trust. Writing by heart is building trust with ourselves, our writing, and our creativity.
And the subtitle of your book is A Poetry Path to Healing and Self-Discovery. What kind of poetry does your book help people write, and how does it provide a source of healing?
The kind of writing we do with this book and when people come to my workshops is very personal, self-reflective, very honest writing. I really feel like in our writing, we can show up with radical honesty. We can say things on the page to ourselves that we often can't say to anybody else or in certain areas of our lives. And if we don't want anybody else to ever read that or find it, rip it up, throw it away, burn it, but we've said it. So it's now real. And it's like looking in a mirror, a kind mirror that sees beneath the surface into our subterranean depths. And we are in touch with deep psyche, perhaps our muse, and we can discover things that we don't ordinarily have access to in our regular waking, living, working lives when we do this kind of writing. So we can access what I call wild wisdom that we all have, deep psyche, intuition, and the kinds of metaphors and imagery and felt experience that gives rise to the writing that becomes rich and informative for us. So where we actually learn something, discover something from the writing that we do that then makes us even more of who we are.
So someone comes to you and says, I am not poetically inclined. May they write in other forms?
Absolutely. Yes. And I'd have to say these days, I'm really using poetry as an umbrella term to encompass and hold space for this deep, personal, self-reflective, self-expressive writing that we do in my workshops or that anyone can do with the books. And all forms of writing are welcome. I really guide people to write in whatever way is most natural for them. So if that's story or prose or song lyrics or even just mind spill, heart spill, stream of consciousness, just write is the main message. Just get writing. You can experiment, you can explore, you can make a mess, you can write something brilliant anytime. But to get going, to get started, just put pen to paper and write in whatever way comes naturally for you.
What about limericks?
Definitely. Let's start a limerick workshop. I don't know if I've ever written one, but I think it would be a good challenge.
Bennett Cerf was famous for saying he wrote a limerick about limericks being, shall we say, dirty. A limerick packs laughs gastronomical into a space that is so economical. But the good ones I've seen so seldom are clean, and the clean ones so seldom are comical.
Oh,
Bennett Cerf, the great Bennett Cerf.
I love the economical of it. Really good.
What can a regular writing practice do for us?
Oh, be a place of refuge, of communion with self, of deep friendship and self-compassion, a place where we practice with ourselves kindness, curiosity, and courage in looking at ourselves, in saying yes to our creativity, our imagination, the deep cues that come from that deeper psyche within us. It puts us into a deeper flow, a deeper conversation with ourselves and with how we're moved by life, and then valuing this. This fast-paced world doesn't give a lot of time for self-reflection. And I think we're at a loss because of that. So I think in this cultivating this practice of writing is a time to slow down and really practice presence with ourselves and really value how we're moved by life, nature, beauty, sorrow, what's happening in the world, to really sit and then to make something of it, to be moved so much by something, whether it's something that hurts or something that's beautiful, to be moved so much that we have to spill open into creative expression.
What advice do you have for someone who says they're having a hard time starting a regular writing practice?
I would say come to workshop and feel the support of other people and have supportive structure where you're going to write something each week, and it doesn't need to be brilliant. You're not writing for anyone else, but you're getting in the practice. And if you can't come to workshop, then set up a schedule for yourself that works for your natural rhythm. Maybe you write first thing in the morning. Maybe you write for 15 minutes while you have a lunch break. Maybe you write, like I do, a gratitude list every single night before I go to bed. Those are great ways to start. Another of my favorites that I suggest is keeping what I call a sparkle list. And this is brand new from the last workshop we just did called Spark the Muse. So a sparkle list is writing down at some point during the day 5 to 10 things that you noticed throughout your day that sparked you in some way. You found it beautiful, it moved you, it brought your tears. It made you stop for a moment and recognize whatever that sparkle was, and then to keep a list of these. Because like a gratitude list and like gratitude, the more we become aware of what does spark us, spark our muse, what we're grateful for, we make more room to have that experience. And those experiences feed us on a very deep level.
What about those who have always been writers, longtime writers, who have writer's block?
Yes. So what I suggest for anyone with writer's block, and I do this myself because Most of us do tend to experience it at some time in our lives. And, we want to run and hide from it because it's awful. It feels terrible. And we feel like we'll never write again. And we can't even look at ourselves in the mirror or have a conversation because we're so upset. And it feels like the end of the world. So the biggest thing I always suggest is changing your environment. So if you live in a busy city, go to nature. If you live in a more quiet rural area, go somewhere where there's more stimulation so that we have a different kind of input coming in that's going to populate different thoughts and ideas and move us from a different resource. So that's a big one. The other thing I always suggest is to move your body. I am a person who moves and exercises every day, and I find that I can sit for 2 hours and really have no new ideas about what I want to write or a workshop that I'm planning. And the minute I go outside to go for a walk, literally 10 steps into my walk, I've got the whole workshop. I know what I need to do with that one part of that one poem. So if you're like me and you're a person who thinks best or finds the still point in movement, get out and move your body. And then the final thing for writer's block is to trust that even when we're not generating new work, there is always something gestating under the surface in the fertile darkness. And everything in nature has a fallow time. So does creativity. So does human experience. So to allow for the wholeness of the cycle, and so hard to trust the times when we're not producing the way we want to. But if we can make friends with this part of the cycle as well, knowing that there are seeds that when they're ready, they're gonna start climbing up toward the light. If we can trust that, we will be able to sit through the fallow times.
And among those seeds, you say that the elements of air, fire, earth, and water each possess a unique power and wisdom that can fuel our writing and our lives. Please explain.
I love working with the elements as living beings. I think they are potent and ancient forces that have lives of their own, and that we can call on the energy of these primal energies to fuel not only our writing, but to revitalize our lives. And so we can call on the fluidity of water. We can call on the grounding of earth, on the all-pervasive lightness of air that connects everything, that we can call on the spark and the sizzle and the flame and fury of fire. And I love to have people in my workshops I'll take them through a guided journey with each of the elements, and then they allow one of the elements to choose them, and they become that element and write from the voice of that element, writing about the wisdom and the skills they know and that they now have as this element. It's so much fun.
You encourage your readers to give their bodies a voice through writing. Tell us more about why this is important.
Well, I was a body worker for 27 years, doing massage and specializing in rehab with spinal cord injury patients. And so over 27 years, you can imagine I worked with hundreds of thousands of bodies. And what I learned is that our bodies carry the stories of our whole lives. And if we invite and give our bodies an opening, they will tell us their stories and what they need to heal. So body language is the largest chapter of the book. And we start with very user-friendly, non-vulnerable body parts like the hands and the feet. And we move on to more vulnerable parts such as the belly and the hips. And we really play with not only giving our love and our acceptance and our presence to our body parts and even to areas that we've had challenges or sickness or wounding. And so befriending and giving our love to different parts of our bodies that maybe we've spent years pushing away because they hurt or isolating ourselves from. So we give our love to our body, and then other body parts, we allow them to give us their wisdom, like feet, teach me about stability. Heart, teach me about loving. Knees, teach me about flexibility, like this.
Tell us about the importance of the inner wilderness.
So this inner wilderness, I touched on a little while ago when we talked about making room for the unknown. And I think that so many of us are so conditioned and enculturated by what is put on us. We're supposed to act a certain way and look a certain way and go after certain things in our lives. And I think there's a time for each of us when we realize that some of those ways that we have been conditioned don't really work for us. So first, we have to come to a place of being willing to not know, and then doing this deeper inquiry work with ourselves to find out, who am I really? Who am I underneath all the layers of conditioning? And what really fulfills me? What really gives me joy and fulfillment in this life? And how can I create a life around what my deeper values are? How do I really want to relate to myself, to life, to other people? So this inner wilderness is being willing to go out into uncharted territory within ourselves and kind of do a personal vision quest of inquiry that is really, who am I really? Beneath the surface, beneath what I've always been told who and how to be. Who am I for myself? And then hopefully once we touch that, from that place, what do I have to offer? How do I serve?
My guest is Meredith Heller. Her book is called Writing by Heart, A Poetry Path to Healing and Discovery. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute? When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can. But it's just as important to take time for yourself. AARP can help. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Meredith Heller. Her book, Writing by Heart, A Poetry Path to Healing and Self-Discovery. In your chapter entitled Sanctuary, you have under Everything Contains Everything, an amazing poem entitled Blue Bowl. Would you share that with us, please?
I would love to. Thank you. This is one of my pieces. Blue Bowl. This blue bowl, like an empty sky, turned inside out with small fractures, where its earthen soul shows through, where its shine has been rubbed away by stars passing through. This blue bowl turned on a wheel, turned in someone's hands, born of the thick brown clay that lay asleep inside the earth, holding her bones together. This blue bowl glazed with cerulean blue paint from glass that tumbled onto a tiny beach in the Greek islands by the Mediterranean Sea, where one day when I was 17, I saw a man catch an octopus with his bare hands, beat it against a rock until it was dead, and then take it home and cook it up with garlic and onions, leeks and tomatoes from his garden, and feed it to his wife and children after a long day, making blue glaze in the hot sun. This blue bowl, fired in the kiln with fire from the sun, or wherever fire comes from. Where does fire live before it's born? Does the spark that makes fire come from the stars that circle the sky, that live inside my bowl? This blue bowl, which I now hold in my hands and pass into the hands of my lover, who sits beside me munching popcorn and peanuts and small pieces of dark chocolate that he feeds me from this blue bowl, with his fingers laughing, his mouth smiling, his eyes like river rocks shining. This blue bowl, held in the hands of everyone who helped make it and bring it to market, where I saw it and loved it, brought it, bought it, and carried it home in the basket on my bike. This blue bowl, like an empty sky, but not so empty, so full of all the lives that helped shape this vessel, which now holds its own open palms up to the light.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's breathtaking.
Thank you.
May writing be a source of sanctuary in this often crazy world.
This is what we were just talking about slowing down. The pace of our world these days is, I find, insanely ridiculous. I find it drains me. So to have the sanctuary, the refuge, the slowing down for self-reflection through our writing, I think is such a necessary balance to the crazy pace of the world these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What I used to do before going to work in the morning after taking my shower and organizing things for the day, I'd sit at my desk and see if anything would come through me, and occasionally a poem would come through me, and I would write it before going to work, and I found that that was a wonderful way to get my day started.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I know somebody who, during their shower, just sees if anything wants to come through, and then they come out of the shower with a little piece each morning.
So that's beautiful. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
Shower poems.
Absolutely. What is the great undoing, and what does that have to do with writing?
I think this goes again hand in hand with what we were recently talking about with both the wilderness and the unknown. And so the undoing is this melting process of melting and softening the structures and the conditioning that were placed into us before we really had a choice, before we really had a conscious choice of who we wanted to be, how we wanted to live, what mattered to us. And so the great undoing is being willing to let go of what no longer works for us, let go of conditioning and culture that was put on us before we really had a choice, and to give ourselves time to not have to be producers. You know, in this society, in this culture, it is all about what am I producing? And that's incredible. I mean, I'm with it too. I produced 2 books and a few poetry collections, and I am on that track, and I love it, and it feeds me, my soul. But back to balance, to give ourselves time of the not doing, the beingness, kind of like the fertile darkness that we were talking about. In the beingness, in the non-doingness, there are seeds that are germinating that can only germinate in the stillness. And if we don't have that woven into the fabric of our lives, we suffer. And even what we produce suffers. So giving ourselves times of emptiness, stillness, non-doing, undoing.
And that leads to your final chapter, Metamorphosis, Embody the Poetry of Change. How may doing this help us both adapt to and embrace change?
Oh, yeah. It's one of my favorite chapters. It was one of my favorite workshops. Each of the chapters in this book comes out of the workshops that I teach online. And this was such a rich one. We followed the process that a butterfly goes through, each of its stages from pupa to caterpillar, to this loose kind of goo, to winged one, to full adult butterfly. And we inhabited each of those stages, which also had a lot to do with undoing in that goo stage. And then the becoming process. So this melting down and then becoming the winged butterfly. To be present with each of these stages gives us greater capacity to embrace change in our lives, to know that each stage of the process is necessary. So in terms of the butterfly, we now know that the butterfly builds the strength by breaking out of the chrysalis, and it has to break out of the chrysalis to have the strength in its body to be able to fly. So we have to go through each stage of change and metamorphosis in order to become whatever we're going to become next. So I think it's about really inhabiting each stage along the journey of different parts of our lives, changes we want to make, and the whole journey of life itself.
The poetry of Meredith Heller, her book, Writing by Heart, A Poetry Path to Healing and Self-Discovery. Meredith, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your beautiful work.
Thank you so much. My website is meredithheller.com. All of the information about my books and workshops, some of my writing is on the website. The books are available everywhere books are sold.
Meredith, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this beautiful work.
Thank you. I love talking to you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Herman. Have a wonderful week.